Welcome back. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. It helps YouTube know you want more videos like this. All right, ready? Turn off the lights and listen closely.
I worked as a forest ranger for the U.S. Forest Service for 8 years, stationed primarily in the Willamette National Forest in Oregon. It's a beautiful area, over 1.6 million acres of dense wilderness, towering Douglas firs, and terrain so rugged that there are sections where we'd find human remains years after someone went missing because the search teams simply couldn't access certain areas. People have this romanticized idea of what it means to be a forest ranger. They think it's all beautiful sunsets, friendly deer, and helping lost hikers find their way back to the trailhead. And sure, that's part of it. But there's another side that most people never see. The side that made me eventually transfer to a desk job in Portland and never look back. This happened during my 3rd year as a ranger, in late September of 2011. The summer tourist season was winding down, and we were getting fewer visitors on the trails. The weather was starting to turn cold, especially at night, and the rain was becoming more frequent. I was on patrol in a section called the Three Sisters Wilderness, a remote area that requires a several-hour hike just to reach the trailhead. It's not a place casual hikers venture into. The people who go there are serious backpackers, experienced outdoorsmen who know what they're doing. Or at least they're supposed to know what they're doing. I was about 6 miles into my patrol when I saw something that made me stop. There was a tent, set up just off the trail, but something about it was wrong. The tent flap was open, moving slightly in the wind, and there was beer scattered around the campsite in a way that looked haphazard, almost panicked. I called out, "Hello, anyone here? Forest Service." No response. I approached the tent slowly, my hand instinctively moving to the radio on my belt. The campsite looked like someone had left in a hurry. There was a sleeping bag half pulled out of the tent, a camp stove knocked over, food containers left open with their contents spilling out. But no people. I checked inside the tent. 2 sleeping bags, 2 backpacks, personal items scattered everywhere. A wallet lay open on top of one of the backpacks. I picked it up and checked the ID. Marcus Chen, 34 years old, from Seattle. I radioed back to the station. "This is Ranger Collins. I've got an abandoned campsite at mile marker 6 on the Three Sisters Trail. 2 people, looks like they left in a hurry, requesting backup and search coordination." The dispatcher, Linda, came back within seconds. "Copy that, Collins. Can you describe the scene?" I gave her the details, including the names from the IDs I found in both backpacks, Marcus Chen and Sarah Voss, 31. They'd signed in at the ranger station 3 days prior, planning a 4-day backpacking trip. "Stay at the location," Linda said. "We're organizing a search team now, ETA 2 hours. 2 hours in the wilderness is a long time when you're alone and something feels very wrong. I secured the campsite, marked it with bright orange tape, and began a preliminary search of the immediate area. That's when I found the first piece of clothing. It was a flannel shirt, men's size large, hanging from a tree branch about 30 feet from the campsite. Just hanging there, like someone had carefully placed it. The weird thing was, it wasn't torn or damaged, it wasn't muddy or wet. It looked like someone had simply taken it off and hung it up. 20 feet further, I found a pair of hiking boots, both of them placed side by side on a fallen log. The laces were still tied. I radioed this information back to Linda, and I could hear the concern in her voice when she responded. "Collins, that's consistent with paradoxical undressing. They might be suffering from severe hypothermia." Paradoxical undressing is a phenomenon where people experiencing late-stage hypothermia feel intensely hot and start removing their clothing. It happens right before they die. But the thing was, it hadn't been that cold. Temperatures at night were dropping to around 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Uncomfortable, yes, but not cold enough to cause hypothermia in experienced hikers with proper gear. I continued searching, following a trail of discarded items. A jacket, socks, a t-shirt. each item placed deliberately, almost like breadcrumbs. Then I found the camera. It was a digital camera, expensive looking, lying on the ground next to a stream. I picked it up and turned it on. The battery was still good. I scrolled through the photos. The first dozen were normal. Marcus and Sarah smiling at the trailhead, scenic shots of mountains and forests, a selfie of them in front of their tent, Sarah cooking dinner on the camp stove. Then the photos started to change.
There was a picture, taken at night, the flash illuminating the darkness. It showed the forest surrounding their campsite, but in the background, barely visible between the trees, there was a figure, tall, impossibly tall, and thin. The photo was blurry, but the figure appeared to be watching them. The next photo was taken minutes later according to the timestamp. The same view, but the figure was closer, much closer. You could make out more details now. Long limbs, too long to be human. A face that was pale and featureless. The next photo showed Sarah's face, close up, her eyes wide with terror. Her mouth was open like she was screaming, but no sound would ever come from that frozen image. The last photo on the camera was taken from inside the tent. The flash illuminated the tent's interior, and in the opening of the tent flap, you could see that figure. Right there, crouching down, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, peering inside. After that, no more photos. My hands were shaking as I turned off the camera. I radioed Linda immediately. I found a camera. You need to see these photos. There's something, I don't know what I'm looking at, but we need more people out here, now. The search team arrived an hour later. 6 rangers, 2 search and rescue volunteers, and a canine unit. I showed them the photos, and I watched their faces change as they scrolled through them. Could be a bear standing on its hind legs, one of the rangers suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. That's not a bear, I said. We searched for 3 more days. We found more clothing, scattered over a 2-mile radius. We found Sarah's phone, smashed to pieces like someone had stomped on it repeatedly. We found drag marks leading away from the creek into a section of forest so dense that even the canine unit had trouble navigating it. But we never found Marcus Chen or Sarah Voss. The official report listed them as missing, presumed dead due to exposure. The photos from the camera were included in the case file, but no one could explain what that figure was. The prevailing theory was that it was a person in costume, that Marcus and Sarah had encountered someone dangerous in the woods, someone who had chased them, terrorized them, and ultimately killed them. But I've spent 8 years working in those forests. I've seen bears, mountain lions, even the occasional wolf. I've dealt with dangerous people, meth cooks hiding out in remote areas, fugitives running from the law. What was in those photos wasn't any of those things. After the search was called off, I went back to that campsite one more time, alone. I don't know what I was looking for. Closure, maybe? Answers? I stood there in the clearing where their tent had been, and I listened to the forest. It was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind, just silence. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, coming from deep in the trees. But they didn't sound right. The rhythm was off, like something trying to mimic the sound of walking, but not quite getting it right. I didn't wait to see what it was. I grabbed my gear and I ran back to the trailhead faster than I've ever moved in my life. I transferred to a desk job 3 months later. I still have nightmares about those photos, about that figure crouching at the entrance of the tent, its head tilted, watching. The Three Sisters Wilderness is still open to the public. People still hike there, camp there, completely unaware of what might be watching them from between the trees. Marcus Chen and Sarah Voss are still listed as missing. And somewhere in those 1.6 million acres of forest, I think something is still waiting.
My name is David Reeves. and I spent 12 years working as a backcountry ranger in Yellowstone National Park. If you've never been to Yellowstone, it's hard to describe just how vast and wild it is. Over 2.2 million acres, most of it completely undeveloped wilderness. There are places in that park where human beings have probably never set foot. The job of a backcountry ranger is different from a regular park ranger. We don't staff visitor centers or give guided tours. We spend weeks at a time deep in the wilderness, maintaining remote trails, monitoring wildlife, and checking on the occasional backpacker who ventures into the more isolated areas. It's lonely work, and you have to be comfortable with solitude. You also have to be comfortable with the fact that if something goes wrong, help is days away. This happened in July of 2016. I was on a 3-week rotation in the Thoroughfare region, one of the most remote areas in the entire park. The nearest road is over 30 miles away. It's grizzly country, wolf country, truly wild. I'd been out there for about a week, and I hadn't seen another person since I left the ranger station. It wasn't unusual. The Thoroughfare doesn't get many visitors. It's too far, too rugged, and too dangerous for casual hikers. I was camped near the Yellowstone River, and I had spent the day clearing fallen trees from one of the trails. It was hard work, and by the time I finished, the sun was starting to set. I made dinner, hung my food in a bear bag away from my camp, and settled in for the night. Around 10 p.m., I heard something outside my tent. At first, I thought it was a bear. We've been having issues with a particularly bold grizzly in the area, one that had learned to associate humans with food. I grabbed my bear spray and my flashlight and unzipped my tent. The beam of my flashlight swept across the campsite, but I didn't see a bear. I saw a person. A man standing at the edge of my camp, maybe 20 feet away. He was wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothing, like something from the 1800s. A long coat, a wide-brim hat, and boots that laced up to his knees. "Hey!" I called out. "You okay? You need help?" The man didn't respond. He just stood there, completely still, staring at me. "Sir? Are you lost?" Still nothing. I stepped out of my tent, keeping the flashlight trained on him. As I got closer, I could see his face more clearly, and that's when I realized something was very wrong. His skin was gray. Not pale, not tanned, but gray like ash. And his eyes were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just solid black from edge to edge. What the? The man turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Rationally, I knew it had to be a person, maybe wearing makeup or a mask, some kind of elaborate prank. But out here, in the middle of one of the most remote areas of Yellowstone, that didn't make sense. I radioed back to the ranger station, but the radio crackled with static. I was too far out for a clear signal. I tried 3 more times, but I couldn't get through. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my tent with my bear spray in one hand and my knife in the other, listening to every sound outside. Around 2 a.m., I heard voices. Multiple voices, men and women, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. They sounded close, like they were right outside my tent, but when I looked out, there was no one there. The voices continued for hours, sometimes loud, sometimes barely a whisper, always in that strange language. As soon as the sun came up, I packed up my camp and started hiking back toward the ranger station. It was a 2-day hike, but I didn't care. I wanted out of there. But as I hiked, I kept seeing them. The people in old-fashioned clothing. They were always at a distance, standing on ridge lines or in clearings, watching me.
There were men, women, even children, all wearing clothes from a different era, all with that same gray skin and those black eyes. I counted at least 20 of them over the course of that first day. They never came closer, they never spoke, they just watched. By the time I made camp that night, I was terrified. I'd been a backcountry ranger for over a decade, and I'd never experienced anything like this. I'd seen bears, wolves, moose, all kinds of dangerous wildlife, but this was different. This felt intelligent, deliberate, like I was being herded. That night, I didn't bother setting up my tent. I just built a fire and sat with my back against a tree, my knife in my lap, and waited for morning. Around midnight, they came closer. All of them, emerging from the darkness, forming a circle around my fire. 20, 30, maybe more. Men, women, children, all with that gray skin and those black eyes. They just stood there staring at me. I didn't move, didn't speak. I barely breathed. One of them, a woman in a long dress, stepped forward. She tilted her head, studying me, and then she spoke. Leave. Her voice was wrong. It didn't sound like it was coming from her mouth. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once, from the trees, from the ground, from inside my own head. Leave this place. You don't belong here. I'm a ranger, I said, my voice shaking. I work here. I'm supposed to be here. No, the woman said. This is our land. It was ours before you. It will be ours after you. Leave. The circle of figures began to move closer, tightening around me. I stood up, grabbing my pack. Okay, I'm leaving. They parted, creating a path leading away from my fire, away from the direction I'd been traveling. I followed the path, walking through the darkness, surrounded by those figures. They walked with me, on both sides, behind me, never more than a few feet away. We walked for hours. I lost all sense of direction. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and my flashlight seemed useless, the beams swallowed up by the darkness. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to appear, I found myself at a road, a paved road that I recognized. I was at the north entrance of the park, over 50 miles from where I'd been. I turned around, and the figures were gone. I hitchhiked back to the ranger station and submitted my report. I told them everything, and I expected them to laugh at me, to accuse me of making it up or losing my mind. But they didn't. The supervising ranger, a man named Tom, who'd been with the Park Service for 30 years, just nodded slowly as I told my story. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. He pulled out a file, a thick one, and laid it on the desk between us. We've been getting reports like this for decades. People in old-fashioned clothing, gray skin, black eyes, always in the most remote areas of the park. They don't hurt anyone, but they make it very clear that certain places are off limits. What are they? Tom shrugged. No one knows. The prevailing theory is that there's some kind of residual haunting, echoes of the people who lived here before the park was established. Fur trappers, Native Americans, early settlers, but that's just a theory. Why doesn't the Park Service do anything about it? Do what? Put up signs? Warning ghosts ahead? We can't even prove they exist. Every photo, every video, it always comes out blurry or distorted. And the only witnesses are people like you, lone rangers who are already isolated and exhausted. He closed the file. The unofficial policy is to avoid those areas. We don't send rangers into the deep thoroughfare anymore unless it's absolutely necessary. I quit 3 months later. I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I went into the backcountry, I'd see them out of the corner of my eye, standing in the distance, watching. Yellowstone is still one of the most beautiful places on Earth. Millions of people visit every year, and most of them never experience anything unusual. But if you ever find yourself hiking in the deep backcountry, far from the roads and the crowds, and you see someone in old-fashioned clothing standing in the distance, watching you, do yourself a favor. Turn around. Go back the way you came. Because that land doesn't belong to us. It never did, and they want us to remember that.
I worked as a wildland firefighter and forest ranger in Northern California for 6 years, primarily in the Shasta Trinity National Forest. It's a massive area, covering over 2.2 million acres of wilderness, and during fire season, it can be one of the most dangerous places in the country. This story takes place in August of 2018, during one of the worst fire seasons California had ever seen. The Carr Fire had just torn through the Redding area, and we were stretched thin, with crews working 16-hour days trying to contain dozens of smaller fires before they could grow into major incidents. I was part of a 4-person crew sent to investigate a smoke report in a remote area west of Mount Shasta. The report had come from a fire lookout tower, and they'd spotted what looked like a small campfire that had gotten out of control. We hiked in, carrying our gear and fire suppression equipment. It was a 3-hour hike to reach the area, and by the time we arrived, the sun was starting to set. What we found wasn't what we expected. There was a fire, yes, but it wasn't out of control. It was contained in a perfect circle, maybe 15 feet in diameter, burning steadily despite there being no visible fuel source. The ground around it was just bare dirt and rock, nothing that should burn. And in the center of the circle, there was a structure. It looked like a cabin, but it was wrong. The proportions were off. The windows were too narrow, the door too wide, and it seemed to be made from wood that was partially burned, like it was perpetually on the edge of collapsing but never quite falling. My crew chief, a man named Rodriguez, who'd been fighting fires for 20 years, stopped dead when he saw it. What the hell is that? None of us had an answer. We approached carefully, but the heat was intense. Even from 30 feet away, it felt like standing next to a blast furnace. We couldn't get close enough to examine the structure or put out the fire. Rodriguez radioed back to base, describing what we were seeing. There was a long pause before the dispatcher responded. Say again? You found a structure inside a fire? That's affirmative. It looks like a cabin, but it's not right. And the fire won't spread beyond a certain radius. It's like it's contained by something. Another pause. Stand by. We stood there for 20 minutes, watching the impossible fire burn until Rodriguez's radio crackled to life again. New orders. Document what you can from a safe distance, then get out of there. Do not attempt to suppress the fire. Do not enter the structure. This is now a restricted area. Rodriguez looked at us, and I could see the confusion on his face. They want us to just leave it? That's what they said. One of my crew members, a younger guy named Jason, spoke up. Should we at least try to see what's inside? Maybe there's someone in there. No one could survive in that heat, I said. Then why is it here? Why is this happening? None of us had an answer. As we were packing up our gear, preparing to hike back out, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a face in one of the cabin's windows. A woman's face, pale and expressionless, staring out at us. Rodriguez, I said quietly, there's someone in there. He turned, looked where I was pointing, and I watched his face go white. Jesus Christ, we need to get her out. But before any of us could move, the woman in the window smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a relieved smile, a knowing smile, like she was aware of something we weren't. Then she stepped back and disappeared into the darkness of the cabin's interior. Jason started toward the fire, but Rodriguez grabbed his arm. Don't. Something's wrong here. This isn't right. There's a person in there. That's not a person. We all stared at him. I've seen this before, Rodriguez said quietly. Once, 15 years ago, during the Cedar Fire in San Diego. Same thing. A structure that shouldn't exist, burning in a perfect circle, a face in the window. 3 firefighters went in to investigate. They never came out. The fire burned for 3 days and then just stopped. The structure was gone. No remains. No evidence it was ever there. That's insane, Jason said. Yeah, it is. But I'm not losing anyone to this. We're leaving. Now. We hiked back out as the sun was setting. And the entire way, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. I kept looking back, expecting to see that woman from the window standing on the trail behind us. When we reached the trailhead, there were 2 men in suits waiting for us. They identified themselves as being with the U.S. Forest Service, but something about them felt off. They asked us questions about what we'd seen, took our cameras and phones, and made us sign non-disclosure agreements. This is a matter of wildfire research. What you saw is part of an ongoing investigation into unusual burn patterns. We need to keep the details confidential. We signed the papers because we didn't know what else to do. 2 days later, I went online and tried to find information about that area, about the fire we'd seen. There was nothing. No reports, no incident listings, no restricted area notices. It was like it never happened. A week later, Rodriguez pulled me aside before our shift. I looked into it, he said quietly. The thing we saw. I've been asking around, talking to older firefighters, people who've been in the service for decades. Their stories, lots of them. Structures that appear during fires, buildings that don't burn, faces and windows. They call them echo fires. No one knows what they are, but they've been happening for as long as people have been fighting wildfires. Why don't anyone talk about it? Because the people who investigate them end up being transferred or forced to retire. The Forest Service doesn't want people asking questions. So what are they? Rodriguez shook his head. I don't know, but I think they're places where something bad happened. Murders, accidents, something that left a mark. And during fires, when the barrier between our world and whatever comes after is thin, those places bleed through. I quit 3 months later. I couldn't do the work anymore. Every fire we fought, I'd find myself looking for that impossible cabin, for those perfect circles of flame, for faces and windows. I never saw it again, but I know it's still out there. And I know that somewhere, firefighters are still encountering those echo fires, still seeing those faces, still being told to leave and not ask questions. If you're ever in a wildfire area and you see something that doesn't make sense, a building that shouldn't exist, a fire that burns in impossible ways, do what Rodriguez said. Don't investigate. Don't try to help. Don't ask questions. Just leave. Because whatever those places are, they're not meant for the living.
This happened to my older brother, Michael, in 2014. He was working as a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, one of the most visited national parks in the United States. Over 10 billion people come through there every year, which means the rangers are constantly dealing with lost hikers, medical emergencies, and various other incidents. Michael had been a ranger for about 5 years when this happened, and he loved the job. He was good at it too. He knew the trails better than anyone, could track lost hikers through terrain that would stump most people, and he had a calm, reassuring presence that made people feel safe. But after what happened in 2014, he was never quite the same. It was late October, and the tourist season was winding down. The leaves were at peak color, which meant there were still plenty of day hikers, but the overnight campers were becoming rare. The nights were getting cold, and most people didn't want to deal with sub-freezing temperatures in a tent. Michael was on patrol in the Cataloochee area, a particularly remote section of the park that's known for its elk population and historic buildings. It was around 4 p.m., and he was heading back to his truck when he heard someone calling for help. He followed the voice and found a woman, probably in her 50s, sitting on the trail with her ankle clearly injured. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, her voice pained. "I twisted my ankle about 2 miles back. I've been trying to walk it off, but I can't put weight on it anymore." Michael examined her ankle. It was badly swollen and probably sprained. She wasn't walking anywhere without help. "Okay, let's get you out of here. My truck's about half a mile that way. I'll help you walk, and then we'll get you to a clinic." The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret, thanked him profusely. Michael got her situated with his arm around her for support, and they started the slow journey back to his vehicle. That's when things started to feel wrong. As they walked, Michael noticed that the forest around them was completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind, just absolute silence. And it was getting darker, much darker than it should be for 4 p.m., even in late October. "Is it just me, or is it getting dark really fast?" Margaret asked. "It's not just you." They walked faster, as fast as Margaret's injury would allow, but the darkness kept deepening. Within 10 minutes, it was as dark as midnight, and Michael had to pull out his flashlight. The beam of the flashlight seemed weak, barely penetrating the darkness. And in the edges of the light, Michael swore he could see movement. Figures darting between trees, keeping pace with them. "Do you see that?" Margaret whispered. "Stay calm, just keep moving." But Margaret wasn't looking at the trees. She was looking at the trail ahead of them. "That's not the way to the parking lot." Michael stopped. She was right. The trail they were on wasn't the one they'd been walking on. It looked similar, but there were subtle differences. The trees were denser, the undergrowth thicker. "We must have taken a wrong turn," Michael said, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. He knew these trails. He couldn't have taken a wrong turn. Margaret was starting to panic. "Where are we? This doesn't look right. Nothing looks right." Michael pulled out his GPS unit. The screen was scrambled, showing nothing but static. His radio was the same, just white noise. They were lost. In a park Michael had worked in for 5 years, on trails he could walk blindfolded, they were lost. "Okay, let's just backtrack. We'll find the main trail." They turned around and started walking back the way they came. But after 20 minutes, they hadn't found the main trail. The forest around them looked increasingly unfamiliar. The trees were wrong, too tall and too thin. The ground was too flat, with none of the rocky terrain that characterized this area. And those figures in the darkness were getting closer. Michael could see them more clearly now. They looked like people, but their movements were wrong. They didn't walk so much as glide, floating just above the ground, their limbs moving in ways that didn't match their momentum. "We need to stop," Margaret said. Her voice was shaking. "We need to stop and wait for daylight. We're just getting more lost." Michael didn't want to stop, but she was right. In the dark, in unfamiliar terrain, they could walk right off a cliff or into a ravine. He found a small clearing and helped Margaret sit down with her back against a tree. He sat beside her, his flashlight in one hand, his radio in the other, continuously trying to get a signal. The figures circled the clearing, staying just beyond the reach of the flashlight. "What are they?" Margaret whispered. "I don't know. Are we gonna die?" Michael didn't answer. They sat there for hours. Michael tried to keep track of time, but his watch had stopped working. The hands were frozen at 4:17 p.m. At some point, one of the figures spoke. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice was hollow, echoing, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We're lost," Michael called out. "We're trying to find our way back to the parking lot." "There is no parking lot here. There is no here. You've walked into the between place, the place where the park ends and something else begins." "How do we get back?" Silence. Then, you wait for the door to open. Sometimes it opens. Sometimes it doesn't. Michael and Margaret sat in that clearing as the figures circled, as the darkness pressed in from all sides, as time seemed to stop entirely. And then, suddenly, it was light. Not dawn, not a gradual lightening. One moment it was pitch black, and the next, the sun was up, morning light filtering through the trees. The figures were gone. Michael and Margaret looked around, disoriented. They were still in the clearing, but the trees looked normal now. The GPS unit worked. The radio worked. Michael called for help, and within an hour a search team arrived. They found Michael and Margaret less than 100 yards from the main trail, less than a quarter mile from where Michael's truck was parked. "Where the hell have you been?" the team leader asked. "You were reported missing 12 hours ago." 12 hours? No, we were only gone for maybe 3 hours. "Michael, it's 8 a.m. You radioed dispatch that you were helping an injured hiker at 4 p.m. yesterday. When you didn't check in, we organized a search." Michael looked at his watch. It still read 4:17 p.m. Margaret's watch was the same. The Park Service launched an investigation, but they couldn't explain what had happened. There was no evidence that Michael and Margaret had been anywhere other than where they were found. No footprints leading off into deeper woods, no signs they'd been lost at all. Michael's GPS unit was examined. The scrambled data on it didn't match anything that technicians had seen before. It was like the device had recorded them being in multiple places at once, or in no place at all. Michael took a leave of absence a month later. He eventually came back, but he refused to work in the Cataloochee area ever again. He told me this story 2 years ago, on Thanksgiving, after he'd had a few drinks and our parents had gone to bed. I've been thinking about what that thing said, about the between place, the place where the park ends and something else begins. I think there are cracks in reality, places where the world we know overlaps with somewhere else. And sometimes, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you slip through. Do you think you almost didn't come back? He was quiet for a long time. Then, I think we were lucky. I think that door opened for us, but I don't think it opens for everyone. He still works as a ranger, but he's different now. More cautious, more superstitious. He carries extra batteries, extra food, extra everything, because he knows that the tools we rely on can fail. The world we think we understand can break apart. And if you find yourself lost in the woods, in a place that doesn't look quite right, where the darkness comes too fast and the silence is too complete, you'd better hope the door opens for you too. Because if it doesn't, you might be stuck in the between place forever.
I'm sharing this story with permission from a former colleague of mine named Patricia Ward. She worked as a ranger in Olympic National Park in Washington State for 15 years before retiring in 2019. She asked me not to use her real name, so Patricia Ward is a pseudonym. But the events she described are, to the best of her recollection, exactly what happened. This took place in the summer of 2017 in the Hoh Rainforest, one of the most beautiful and eerie places in the continental United States. It's a temperate rainforest, which means it's lush, green, and gets an absolutely staggering amount of rainfall every year, over 140 inches. The trees are covered in moss, the air is always damp, and visibility is limited because of how dense the vegetation is. Patricia was on a routine patrol, checking on some of the backcountry campsites and making sure hikers were following leave no trace principles. It was mid-July, and the park was busy, but the area Patricia was in was fairly remote. Around mid-afternoon, she came across a tent that was set up in an unauthorized location, off the trail and away from designated camping areas. This was a fairly common issue. People wanted privacy or the perfect Instagram photo, so they'd break the rules. Patricia approached the tent and called out, "Hello? This is a park ranger. You're camped in an unauthorized area. I need you to come out and talk to me." No response. She called out again, louder this time. Still nothing. The tent flap was closed and there was no movement from inside. Patricia hesitated. In her experience, there were a few possibilities. The hikers were out exploring and not in the tent. They were asleep, though unlikely in the middle of the afternoon, or something was wrong. She called out one more time, then carefully unzipped the tent flap. The smell hit her immediately. Not the smell of death or decay, but something else, something chemical and sweet, like rotting fruit mixed with formaldehyde. Inside the tent was a woman, sitting cross-legged facing the back wall. She was completely still, her long dark hair covering her face, her hands resting on her knees. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The woman didn't respond, didn't move. Patricia's training kicked in. This could be a medical emergency, diabetic shock, stroke, drug overdose. She climbed into the tent, reaching for her radio to call for backup. "Ma'am, I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help. Can you hear me?" The woman's head tilted slightly, but she still didn't turn around. Patricia reached out to touch her shoulder, and the moment her fingers made contact, the woman spun around with impossible speed. Her face was wrong. The features were human, eyes, nose, mouth, but they were arranged slightly incorrectly. The eyes were too far apart, the mouth too high, the nose too flat. It was like looking at a person's face in a funhouse mirror, distorted just enough to trigger every primal alarm in Patricia's brain. And the woman was smiling. The kind of smile that used too many muscles, that stretched too wide, that showed too many teeth.
"Hello?" the woman said, and her voice was layered, like multiple people speaking the same word at slightly different times. Patricia scrambled backward out of the tent, her heart hammering. She grabbed her radio, but before she could call for help, the woman emerged from the tent. She moved wrong. Her joints bent at angles that shouldn't be possible, and she seemed to flow rather than walk, like she was being pulled forward by invisible strings. "Why are you afraid?" the woman asked, tilting her head too far to one side. "I'm just camping. Isn't that what people do here?" You need to come with me," Patricia said, trying to keep her voice steady. You're camping in an unauthorized area. I need to escort you to... I like it here. It's quiet. The trees listen. Do you ever listen to what the trees say, Ranger? Patricia's hand moved to the pepper spray on her belt. Ma'am, I don't know what's going on here, but I need you to come with me. Now. The woman's smile widened impossibly further. No, I don't think I will, but I'll give you a message to take back. Tell them that the forest is waking up. Tell them that the old places remember. Tell them that we've always been here, in the spaces between the trees, and we're tired of pretending we're not. Who's we? The woman gestured around them, and for the first time, Patricia noticed that the forest had changed. The trees seemed closer, denser. The light had dimmed even though it was still mid-afternoon. And standing between the trees, barely visible in the shadows, were more figures. Dozens of them, all with faces that were slightly wrong, all standing perfectly still, all watching. Patricia ran. She later said she'd never run so fast in her life. She could hear footsteps behind her, too many footsteps, coming from every direction, and she could hear that layered voice calling after her, echoing through the trees. The forest is waking up. The forest is waking up. The forest is waking up. She didn't stop running until she reached her truck at the trailhead. She locked the doors, started the engine, and drove straight to the ranger station. When she told her supervisor what had happened, she expected skepticism or concern for her mental state. Instead, her supervisor just nodded slowly and pulled out a file. You're not the first. This has been happening since the park was established, maybe longer. We don't talk about it because what would we say? There are things in the forest that look like people but aren't. The public would panic. Tourism would collapse. What are they? We don't know. Some people think they're nature spirits, remnants of indigenous beliefs given form. Some think they're interdimensional beings that exist in the spaces where the wilderness is thickest. Some think they're just hallucinations caused by spores from the local fungi. Take your pick. So what do? We avoid them. When we get reports of strange encounters, we note them in this file, and we try to keep people away from those areas. But we can't close half the park just because something weird lives there. Patricia went back to that campsite the next day, with 2 other rangers. The tent was gone. No trace it had ever been there. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, nothing. But carved into a nearby tree was a message, in letters that looked burned into the wood. The forest is waking up. Patricia transferred to a different park 6 months later. She couldn't handle the feeling of being watched every time she went into the backcountry. Couldn't handle knowing that those things were out there, pretending to be human, delivering their cryptic messages to anyone unlucky enough to encounter them. Before she retired, she told me something that still gives me chills. I've been thinking about what that thing said, about the forest waking up, and I've been watching the news, seeing all the reports about people going missing in national parks, about the increase in strange encounters, about animals behaving oddly. I think whatever those things are, they're not lying. I think something is happening to the wild places. Something's changing, and I think we should all be a lot more afraid than we are. Olympic National Park is still open. People still hike the Hoh rainforest every day. Most of them never see anything unusual. But some do. And those reports end up in that file, the one that's locked in the ranger station, the one that's been growing thicker every year. The forest is waking up, and whatever that means, I don't think we're ready for it.
I worked as a seasonal ranger in Glacier National Park in Montana for 2 summers, 2019 and 2020. It's one of the most stunning places I've ever been, with dramatic mountain peaks, pristine lakes, and some of the most challenging hiking in the country. It's also one of the most dangerous parks in the system. Grizzly bears, mountain goats that will charge you if you get too close, weather that can turn deadly in minutes, and terrain that's claimed the lives of numerous experienced hikers. This happened in August of 2020, near the end of my 2nd season. The park was less busy than usual due to COVID restrictions, which meant the backcountry was quieter than normal. Some of us liked it. Fewer people meant less work, but there was something unsettling about the emptiness. I was on patrol on the Iceberg Lake Trail, a popular but strenuous hike that climbs over 1,200 feet and takes you to a stunning alpine lake surrounded by cliffs. It was late afternoon, and I was heading back down when I encountered a hiker coming up. He looked to be in his 60s, fit for his age, wearing quality gear. He had a large backpack, and I assumed he was planning to camp at one of the backcountry sites. "Afternoon," I said as we passed. He stopped and turned to me. "Excuse me, Ranger, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Have you seen my daughter? She's 14, blonde hair, wearing a red jacket. We got separated about a mile back." My stomach dropped. "You got separated? When?" "About an hour ago. She was ahead of me on the trail, and I stopped to adjust my pack. When I looked up, she was gone." An hour in bear country with a 14-year-old girl. I immediately radioed dispatch and reported a missing child. Then I took down a detailed description and told the father to stay where he was in case she came back this way. I hiked back up the trail, calling the girl's name. "Emily, this is a park ranger. If you can hear me, call out." No response. I reached the spot where the father said they'd gotten separated and started a wider search pattern, checking off the trail and looking for any signs of her. That's when I saw the footprints. Small footprints, the right size for a teenage girl, leading off the trail and into the forest. But they weren't walking patterns. They were running patterns, deep impressions in the soft earth like she'd been sprinting. I followed them, calling Emily's name, my concern growing with every step. The footprints led to a small clearing, and there I found her jacket, the red jacket her father had described, lying in the middle of the clearing. But no Emily. I radioed back. "I found her jacket. No sign of the girl. Request immediate search and rescue." Within 2 hours, we had a full search team combing the area. K9 units, helicopter flyovers, over 30 rangers and volunteers spreading out in a grid pattern. We searched until it was too dark to continue safely, then resumed at first light. We never found Emily. The dogs picked up her scent at the clearing where I had found her jacket, but then it just stopped, like she'd vanished into thin air. No trace. No tracks, no evidence of where she'd gone. What we did find was strange. In the clearing, arranged in a perfect circle, were 7 stones. They looked natural, like they'd been picked up from the surrounding area, but they were placed with deliberate precision. Each stone had a symbol carved into it, symbols I didn't recognize. We also found Emily's phone, smashed into pieces and scattered around the clearing. Not dropped or accidentally broken, deliberately destroyed.
The father was devastated. He cooperated fully with the investigation, and there was no evidence he'd harmed his daughter. He was genuinely searching for her, genuinely distraught. The official report listed Emily as missing, presumed lost in the wilderness. But I knew there was more to it. 3 days after the search was called off, I went back to that clearing alone. I don't know what I was looking for. Answers, maybe? Something that would make sense of what had happened. The circle of stones was still there. I took photos, noting the symbols carved into them. As I was photographing the last stone, I heard a voice. She's not gone. She's just somewhere else now. I spun around. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a woman. Native American, probably in her 70s, wearing traditional clothing. "Who are you?" I asked. "Someone who knows these mountains better than you ever will." She gestured to the stones. "Do you know what these are?" "No." "They're markers, boundaries. The old people put them here a long time ago to mark the places where our world touches another world. The thin places." "What are you talking about?" "That girl, Emily, she crossed over. Whether she meant to or whether something pulled her, I don't know. But she's not in your world anymore. She's in the other place, the place beyond the boundary." "That's insane." The woman smiled sadly. "You think so? Then explain how she vanished without a trace. Explain the symbols on those stones. Explain why so many people go missing in these mountains, why the dogs lose the scent, why there's never any evidence." I couldn't. The mountains have always taken people. Long before this was a park, long before white people came here. The mountains take, and sometimes they give back, and sometimes they don't. That's the way it's always been. Can we get her back? No. The boundaries only open one way. Once you cross over, you're gone. She turned to leave, and I called after her. "Wait! What's your name? Who are you?" She looked back at me. "I'm no one. Just someone who remembers the old stories. Someone who knows the mountains don't belong to us. We belong to them." Then she walked into the forest and disappeared. I reported the encounter, but when we tried to find the woman, we couldn't. No one matching her description lived in the area. No one had seen her. Emily was never found. Her case is still open, still unsolved. I quit at the end of that season. I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep working in a place where children disappeared without explanation, where ancient boundaries between worlds were marked with carved stones, where the wilderness itself seemed hungry for human souls. Glacier National Park is beautiful. It's awe-inspiring, but it's also dangerous in ways that most people don't understand. The bears and the weather and the terrain, those are dangers you can prepare for, dangers you can understand. But the other dangers, the ones that exist in the thin places, the ones marked by circles of stones and ancient warnings, those you can't prepare for. All you can do is hope that when you hike into those mountains, you don't accidentally cross a boundary you can't come back from. Emily's father still comes to the park every year. He hikes that same trail, searches the same areas, hoping for any sign of his daughter. He won't find her. She's somewhere else now. And I don't think she's ever coming back.